In 2013, I visited my father's village in the southern part of Fiji. And on the night that I arrived, I asked my uncle, could I please borrow your boat to go fishing in the morning? And he said, yes, you can go with your cousin in the morning. And so that night, I couldn't sleep. I looked forward to the fishing expedition with such great anticipation. In the morning, we woke up, had breakfast, and we walked down to the shore. As we were walking down to the shore, the villagers who were heading out to the plantations waved us goodbye and wished us well on our fishing expedition. So I get into this boat and I sit there in the middle of the bay area with my cousin, and we're waiting for an hour. We're sitting there having a bit of chit-chat, waiting for 2 hours. Nothing happens. Okay, I thought this bay area was, really good for fishing. She said, yeah, it is, don't worry. Sitting there, waiting 3 hours. In the meantime, 4 seasons come and go, and I'm sitting there thinking, what in the world is happening here? Nothing to write home about, right? Anyway, as we're sitting there and waiting, suddenly her mobile telephone rings, and I jump out of sheer fright because I'm thinking, you're in the middle of the ocean. Surely there couldn't be any reception. She says, oh, don't worry, we've got 2 telecommunications towers in Kandavu. And I said, okay, that's pretty good. Anyhow, the telephone rings, she picks up the phone, and it's her father. And he is the head of the fishing clan in Fiji. My uncle says to her, have you guys caught any fish yet? And she says, no. So he says, okay, turn the boat around, make sure that the boat is positioned between the roof of the church and the roof of the school. And he's standing, and I can see his stick figure in the distance with a rounded tummy, of course, and he's pointing. And so we head over and position the boat. And as we position the boat, we drop our lines. And guess what happens? Within a matter of minutes, we caught more than 10 fish. My mum and dad are from 2 provinces in Fiji. My mum is from the province of Te Levu, the district of Wainimbuka, and the village of Naivizula. They're often referred to as the Naloto people. My dad comes from the province of Kandavu. His district is Ravitaki, and his village is Ravitaki. I grew up in a suburb in Fiji called Kinoya, and as I was growing up in Kinoya, I remembered it to be the most happiest days of my childhood. We here in Australia, we like to talk about ourselves as a nation of firsts in terms of diaspora. We often like to when we see a Fijian who is out there doing something great, we often like to say, he's the first Fijian to do this. She's the first Fijian to do that. And we do this across all different aspects of life, from sports, education, other innovative fields. We excel as a little community, but with a lot of great strength. So when I meet people, they like to say to me, oh, you're the first Fijian police officer that ever worked with New South Wales Police Force. And I say, no, actually there was another one before me, and she was adopted by a loving Australian family. Or they like to say to me, oh, that's right, you're the first CEO for a migrant resource centre. In New South Wales, there's 9 migrant resource centres, and I happen to be a CEO of that. I don't know if that's true. Or they'd like to say, that's right, you're the first CEO, a woman, to head up a rugby league team from the Pacific, which is the Fiji New South Wales Cup bid. We're trying to get a Fijian team into the New South Wales competition. And I say, yeah, but I'm only there for a little while. You see, I know nothing about rugby league, but I know everything about establishing good, strong governance within an organisation. And I like to think that my story is about possibilities. When I come and work with a project, or when I come to look at which areas that I would like to venture into, I like to look at possibilities. When people say it can't be done, I like to go into areas and think, yes, it can be done. And so begins my journey of possibilities from Fiji. On the first day of school, I still remember in class 1, my parents, my mum actually, she took me to my first day, class 1, St. Agnes, up there in Nambour, and she left me there, and I was never to see her again for a number of years. Now, I can still vividly remember in my mind the sound, the touch, the smell, the colours, and the turmoil of separation. It broke my heart in two, because I knew that when I was going home that day, my mother wouldn't be there any longer. So she migrated over to Australia. She followed my dad. My dad first went to New Zealand, migrated to New Zealand. Then from New Zealand, he came over to Sydney. So my parents were here from the mid to late 70s. And then in 1981, the Fraser government had a huge amnesty. My parents were here without status. And when that amnesty happened in 1981, that is how they got their papers. And so off they went to Fiji to collect their children. You know, when I was growing up in Fiji, I always thought that I grew up in a mansion, although I slept under a kitchen table with my grandmother every night. In my house was a house full of love. I had 8 uncles and aunties, and the house was always full of people who came to visit from the village, people who came from different parts of Fiji to come into this house. And I always thought that it was a mansion. When I went back to Fiji in my late teens and I walked into this house and I saw that it was only a 3-bedroom house. And I thought to myself, wow, all of these people living in one house, and it was just amazing, the amount of love that I had. My aunties and uncles treating me like I was their own. Actually, they even treated me better than their children. So I had such a fantastic childhood growing up in Kinaya. So my parents come to Fiji, and they come to take us. Again, separation from my grandparents. Both my grandparents from my mum's and my dad's side, I was very, very close to. Separating from them meant that I couldn't be with them any longer. The rituals, the routines, the explanations, the knowledge about rituals and culture and all of that was no longer going to happen for me as a young child. And for me, my separation from my grandparents had a huge, huge impact in my life. I believe the research says out there that grandparents have much more of an impact on children's lives than parents. Who's to know that? And so, I come into a country and all of a sudden, the bustleness, the Sunday lunches, going with my cousins to the movie matinees, as they were called back then, going to picnics, the kite season, making kites, chasing kites, fishing, prawning, all of that was suddenly gone. And here I was, growing up in a place called Newtown. I missed home. And in my loneliness, and in my escape to loneliness, I actually went to reading. So I started reading. The minute that I walked into this flat in Newtown, I noticed that there was a 6-tier bookshelf in the corner of the lounge room. I actually counted it as I was walking past. And as we settled in and the loneliness began to set in, I decided to find an escape into those books. Books that were factual, books that were full of fantasy, I started to read those books. Shelf number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I get to the bottom of the shelf and there's a Bible. It's a Catholic Bible. So in my hunger and thirst for knowledge, what do? I read all of the 66 pages of that Bible, including the index. I also grew up down the road from Sydney Uni. Every Sunday, I would get on my roller skates, not rollerblades, roller skates, and I would go down to that university and I would walk in between the aisles, touch the books, smell those books, and as a young person, I said to myself, one day I'm going to come to this university. And at the age of 46, I'm there doing my postgraduate studies. My mum was such a big influence in my life. As I went over to her house today, and I was telling one of the speakers, walked into her house to pick up my jacket, and as I walked out of the house, I thought, she was cooking curry, and I smelled like curry. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness. And I said to her as I was leaving, Mum, I'm actually kind of nervous about today. And she says to me, don't worry, you were born for this. So my mum was the biggest, greatest influence in my life. She always told me that I was different. Throughout my school age, she always said to me, you're different, there's something about you, you're going to go to greater heights, always just encouraging. So I did something different after I graduated from high school. A couple of years later, I met the father of my children, my 3 children, one of who's sitting in the audience today. And guess what? We did something different. We eloped for 2 years and came back home. Of course, my parents were devastated. What on earth is going on? They said. But, of course, they received me back into our family home. Years after that, the children's dad and I decided to separate. Then I decided to join the police force after that separation. During my time at the police force, I moved from being in uniform and then to civilian experiences throughout the organisation. As Emily mentioned, I then went into Fiji, took my kids with me, packed them up, and we went across to Fiji. You know, when people say that you are not Fijian or you're Australian, you're either here nor there, I say that I'm both. I'm deeply privileged to identify myself as diaspora, and as a Fijian woman, I have learned to give over to who I am. In my heart, I belong to 2 worlds, and I harness and balance both as an encapsulation of who I truly am. We often talk about the lack of connection in our community, about young people not having a sense of identity. And this is an issue we love to talk about, but how is where we lack. I met a Fijian man in jail the other day, and as I walked in and they announced the official visitor is here to see the inmates, he ran up to me and he said to me, I am from Fiji. I need to know more about Fiji. Can you tell me where you're from? And can you please tell me some stories? I learned later on that man had been disconnected from his family. And it made me wonder, I wonder if he went through the same isolated experiences that most of us go through when we first arrived in Australia. But times have changed. Our community is now larger, and I often wonder if we could ever replicate the extended family here with a stronger sense of community and community participation, without the created boundaries based around race, faith, or self-interest groups. The question I pose is, if I know who I am, where I come from, and where I sit in the multi-layers and the multiplicity of my culture, tradition, and beliefs, and moreover my identity as a Fijian-born woman in this modern space, time, and world, if I'm in complete surrender to who I am, are my children? Are your children? These are the questions we need answers to, questions to which answers can only be self-answered. I think the diaspora journey is about a journey that is very personal. So in closing, I feel as I navigate through life and think about my fishing expedition and the story that I opened with, there are things I continue to ponder upon. Navigation through life is not about perfection. I continue to live and learn. There is more comfort in knowing that I'm a continual work in progress. I'm still positioning myself to everything that there is a season. Refining placement in multicultural Australia takes a lot of time. Iron sharpens iron. I find it important for myself to be acutely aware of my placement in the multiple layers of areas that I continuously operate in, like work, family, and recreation. And time refines character, and reading has developed me even more. Where there is clarity of my values, I have the freedom to choose to be anyone I choose to be. And I choose to be outstanding in everything that I do, and certainly not part of the status quo. I find that the older that I get, the more that I withdraw myself from a lot of community projects, and my circle begins to get smaller. And I sit back and I have discussions with my children and a handful of people about our diaspora experiences. And most certainly, I read for knowledge and strive for greater wisdom for the purpose of insight and understanding. Vinaka Vakalep.